first grew curious about the paranormal. Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
And this is House of Asher. I am your host, Steve Asher. And this is episode 51. And I want to appreciate everybody for tuning in. If you're either listening on Spreaker or on Conflict Radio on YouTube, I again appreciate you guys tuning in. Because like I said, this is a young show. It's a little rough around the edges, but that's okay. The spit and polish they can save for another show. And that's just how I like to bring it. I want it to be, I was never raised too highbrow. More of a working class kind of guy, and I like to kind of be more honest with you. If I had to be honest with you and more direct, as opposed to lying to you and maybe coming off sounding better, I'd rather give you the truth on things. So, one of the things we're going to talk about tonight, and I have a very special guest with us tonight. I grew up being entertained and amazed and drew into stories like, the King Arthur stories and the Knights of the Round Table and all the epic stories of, through that and the Crusades and the Chalice of Christ and all these different things that sort of inexplicably tied into things. I was a very big watcher of things like Of In Search Of and Is It Real and things like that. And in the processes of having that sort of education and exposure, which thank God that I had that, I had come across a gentleman by the name of Mr. Graham Phillips, and he is the guest we have on today. Mr. Phillips, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on.
It's funny. You'll listen to this, and I have an intro. It's actually my brand new intro, and I wanted to have, because we spoke off air a little bit about how there's something very commanding and something very, very, I don't know what the word is, compelling when English is spoken as it should properly be spoken, and as the Queen's English, or however you want to call it. And my intro actually is sort of close to your voice. It almost sounds like you did that. So you're going to maybe get a laugh at that after you hear this. But
I actually thought that when I heard it. I thought,
oh, you heard that?
How's he made my voice do that?
It's like I could have you say a lot of stuff, but yeah, it's so funny that I was thinking about the same thing too. I was like, my God, it sounded like he did a voiceover for me. I may ask you to do that after the show. Maybe put a proper sounding voice on that. But again, thank you for being on here. And a lot of the folks that listen to the show now, there's some folks that have been following this type of stuff for a long time, and even folks that aren't so much into more esoteric or more paranormal things, love stuff, the old legends and stories of Templars and all this stuff, and tying in with Mary Magdalene and all that stuff. Obviously, like the Da Vinci Code was huge. And what people don't realize is that you have been into so many things. I should have probably done this at the beginning of the show, but let me do this little intro for you, because it says author Graham Phillips has been described as a historical detective, a modern-day adventurer, and a real-life Indiana Jones. Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, Graham's findings are always original, thought-provoking, and his books make an exciting read. And one of the books I want to talk to you about today is The Lost Tomb of King Arthur. And I know that you've seen a lot of places, and that's what's so crazy is, again, I'm a fan above and beyond any of this. If I stopped doing this show or writing books about the paranormal and stuff like that, I would still be listening to your shows and following your stuff on YouTube and listening out to your tweets. Like I've seen you visit like a priory recently, and it was just like, this is so awesome. This has to be an exciting life to be able to kind of go, which I'm sure you do that on your own dime too, but to be able to go and do that. I do that what I can here in the States. I've been lucky enough to visit the Far East, Thailand, and places like that when we had done our oldest son's adoption. But there's so much of a rich history where you live right now. Before we get into so much on the book, can you give just like a real quick Reader's Digest version of kind of how you come into loving doing this was it sort of a happenstance? Was it something you were always compelled toward?
Well, I started off as a journalist working for the BBC, and I then became a magazine editor, and the magazine investigated the paranormal and the unexplained historical mysteries. And I simply was the editor of the magazine. I had no particular interest in any of those subjects before that. But while doing it, I became far more interested in the subject generally, and I began to investigate some of the more mysterious aspects of world history. And over the years since then, back in the 1980s, I've written, I think it's now 19 or 20 books on various things such as, you've mentioned King Arthur, the Holy Grail, the story of Robin Hood, the search for the tomb of Alexander the Great. I've done books about the Ark of the Covenant, a whole series of things, basically looking into, shall we say, lost artifacts, lost graves of famous historical figures, or mysteries surrounding certain people in history, such as William Shakespeare, and what do we really know about him? And that's how I got into it.
So it almost seems like you had sort of an indoctrination by vocation, like you were in it so much, and just by nature, you started picking up aspects of it. I was looking at some of the, which I'm aware of some of these, but some of our listeners may not be. Just in some of your credits, Ancient Aliens, Forbidden Histories, Secrets of the Bible, Indiana Jones and the Ultimate Quest. Is it real? All that. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And how did you juggle all this with all that you do, plus all of the research that you do, all the writing that you did as a journalist? Did you sleep? Do you sleep?
Well, I sleep a lot more now I'm older than I did before. But going back to my 20s, there'd be times when myself and others who are researching mysteries together, either in collaboration for a book or for the magazine, we'd suddenly come up, it might be about 11 o'clock at night, and we'd suddenly realise, hold on a minute, there might be some clues as to what we're looking for, 500 miles away up in Scotland. And we'd immediately just jump in a car and race up there at 11 o'clock at night, get there sort of 6, 7 o'clock the next morning, and then start researching, and then come back. I mean, it was literally racing around the countryside, and that's just in Britain. I mean, sometimes we'd find... I remember one time going out drinking one night with some friends, and somebody... I came back to the house, and there was a message on my answer machine, as you used to have in those days, saying, "Graham, can you get over to the States? We think we might have found something buried off the coast of California." And I was absolutely... I'd been drinking quite a lot, so I didn't really know what I was doing, except they said that the tickets are at the airport ready for you to collect. So I kind of... All I remember is waking up on a plane, not knowing where I was going or how I'd got there. Until I got off the other end, and my brain gradually sort of came to, and I realised I was going to California in search of sunken treasure. So but these days it's more a case of I do a lot of research online. I mean, you can follow trails of clues on Google Earth, and you can do it from your sitting room. So I still do just as much, but I don't quite have to go so far and on all hours of the day and night anymore.
Well, it's so funny because it's like an international road trip. It's got elements of like Scooby-Doo, like a Led Zeppelin concert video, and just like a giant pub crawl. It's so funny because you throw all those elements together. Do you ever kind of get the kind of the old man of the sea, like, telling the young kids, going like, we used to have to really get out there and get on it. You kids can just get on your Google or get whatever your coordinates and pull it up.
I have to keep reminding, in the book I'm writing at the moment, which actually refers to some of the things that happened in one of the first books I wrote, and I have to keep reminding people as I'm writing the book. People will be thinking, well, just go on Google and check it out. Remember, in those days there was no internet, and people are thinking, well, come on, just phone somebody up and ask them to come and join you. No, we had to find telephone boxes in those days, telephone booths. Right. We didn't, there was no such thing as the internet or cell phones, all this sort of stuff. and the research had to be done in libraries. You literally had to go to a library to look through historical manuscripts, and then another manuscript maybe 200 miles away in another library. I mean, really, looking back at things, and I had to type my first books on a typewriter, which some young people probably don't even know what is anymore.
Not an electric one. The old school, the ribbons, you have to keep changing it out. Yeah. Well, I tell my daughters. Because it's like, okay, all right, and you try to put it in terms. I was like, okay, all right, okay, Doctor Who, the police box looks like a lot like what we used to go in to make phone calls.
Yeah, that's it.
It's just a different game now. But do you catch yourself in like I said, I'm 48, so I'm I guess relatively young compared to some folks, but do you kind of catch yourself romanticizing some of that? It's like if we wanted to know about East End, we had to go to East End. We didn't just, if we wanted to hear something about what's going on in the Highlands or in the Moors or whatever, we went there. And it seems so funny now.
I don't really reminisce about it. I think, how on earth did I do it? I mean, if I had to do that now, I just wouldn't bother. I mean, the amount of work that was involved, it's okay when you're in your 20s, but I'm 65 now. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it, but I can carry on doing the same kind of thing I did do at even a greater pace because I've got the whole world's knowledge at my fingertips on the internet. Most ancient manuscripts have been uploaded somewhere or other in copies online, and you can Google Earth anyway. You can say, now, okay, that clue leads down that particular little road. Okay, so you then go on Google and you're driving down that road. Hold on, stop there a minute, and you can go on Skype and share your screen with half a dozen other people, and you can do the quest without leaving your house, and you can do it so much more quickly. And then you say, right, okay, there's an old inn there called the Seaman's Rest. Now, okay, is there anything to do with shipwrecks around here? Right. Onto Google. Yeah, there you go. How we used to do it, literally, all going out and then getting to a place and then waiting till the next morning till the local library opened and then going in there and finding the book. I don't know how we did it. There's no reminiscing. It's thank God I don't have to do it like that now.
But think about it like this. Because I'm maybe a pint half full kind of guy. You've kind of got a kind of a quartermass vibe, because like I said, if the internet went down tonight, if all that went kaputs, boom, and it's back to feet on the ground, you know how to do that. These other kids, when their gadgets are gone, what are they going to do? You've got that knowledge, and that's why I always tell people, because I do have a paranormal team, we try to investigate things, but I go like, look, these gadgets are so cool and it's really wonderful, but there's nothing wrong with, hitting the library. There's nothing wrong with keeping those encyclopedias because something goes wrong, it's good to have that. I'm a very big, firm believer in physical books. And, not to get into a big discussion, but like cursive writing and knowing all that, there will come a time when the written word will be unintelligible to next generations. And that scares me. It's just as a researcher,
People have said to me, like, these early investigations you did, didn't you film them all? Well, no, all you could do it was film with Super 8 cinefilm, like celluloid stuff, and then you had to have it developed, and there was no sound on it anyway. But
yeah, you had to have
these days.
Well, I was just saying, yeah.
Once I've done some research now and found out what I need to do online, I'll go there. And then I know exactly where I'm going, and I'll retrace the steps that I've actually found on Google Earth, filming myself doing it as it goes on, or get someone to film me or whatever. And then keep uploading it every day or two onto Facebook, so people can actually see a lot of my investigations as I go along. And then, of course, a book will come out later about it. People say, "Oh yeah, I remember I was with him when he did that." So it's good in as much now with this modern technology is you can actually take other people from anywhere in the world along with you on one of these quests, and I think that's great personally. So I'm not a dinosaur when it comes to like modern technology. I really like it. I've kept up with it.
Oh, you have to. And that's you almost fall into if you're too analog, you fall into that, because we were kind of joking about Hammer films and all that, and coming up with that. You kind of get that kind of antiquated, almost laughable. It's like, why not take the tech if you can use it in a positive way, not to the point where it weakens you or something like that. If this gives you a way to fact check and a thing to connect with people, I think social media can be used for something very, very worthwhile. And like you said, especially back in the days, because you know how it was, having to send stuff back and forth and mail this and that, and it was a nightmare, and it took forever.
Yeah, I mean no one would have dreamt that we'd have things like a cell phone that's got everything on it. You can film on it, you can record stuff on it, you can write books on it, you can check the whole world's information on it. I mean, if you think back in the 1960s and so forth, they were making films about the future where you've got Captain Kirk flying around the universe and the Enterprise, and his communicator, all he can do through it is speak. And yet now we've got the thing that we all carry around, which is far more advanced than Captain Kirk's communicator.
Right. And that's what's so funny is that I remember seeing stuff talking about, I think it was called like how Star Trek changed the future and stuff. And I definitely think that a lot of those people who watched that type of sci-fi and that type of entertainment, some people took it and digested it. People, I think, very creative people take things away from things that other people won't. And you may take people down a path, and a person who has a more, I don't want to say analytical, but maybe maybe have more of a hunter's eye, they might go, oh, well, there's some tracks here, well, these look fresh, these don't, or I can tell that this has been disturbed, which not, I think we should go this way. Some people will take that, and like you said, and make that part of their world, and like you said, actually try to bring that into reality, and that's something that's really great. Well, I was going to ask you too, in regards of writing the type of books you did, because like I said, I know, like, you go everywhere. I mean, you're all over the place, and I live very, like, vicariously through your adventures that way. I'm hoping one day to visit that area and actually touch, put feet on the ground and visit there. And it's just one of those things that I know too that I would like to investigate some places sometimes there, but I also know that culturally there's differences, and I know that sometimes we come off a little hardcore and we can come off a little heavy-handed, and I think it depends on where you're from, but I definitely would like to go check places like that out. In regards of like Stonehenge and places like that, is that something that you have to necessarily get special permission for, or is that something that's set up for tours, or how were you able to set that up?
Well, it's both, really. If you're just an ordinary tourist and you just turn up to Stonehenge, you don't actually just turn up and find Stonehenge in the middle of nowhere, although it is in the middle of nowhere. About 2 miles away, or a mile maybe, there's a visitor centre, which is this huge modern kind of museum with like displays of various artefacts that have been dug up by archaeologists. They've got an amazing room where they've got they've got a holographic room, if you like, and you're standing inside Stonehenge that they projected onto the walls, and you see it as it was originally 5,000 years, 4,500 years ago, or whatever.
Wow.
And then you gradually see it change as different bits are added on and taken off over the years until it ends up like it is now, and you'll see the people wandering around it in the various clothing that they had at the time. And it's quite an amazing experience because you feel like you are standing inside Stonehenge and travelling through time. So you've got that exhibition centre, which has got, cafe and bar and whatever else. Then you get onto a little like bus thing, and they leave every 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes, and the guy then drives you to where Stonehenge is, down a road, and then you are in the middle of nowhere. But there's pathways that you have to follow. You can't just walk across and actually touch the stones themselves. Right. But you walk right round it, right close to it, so you're within sort of 20 feet of the stones themselves, so you can get great pictures from all directions. And so that's what your ordinary tourist can do. If you want to pay a bit more, you can go for like they have early morning trips around there, where you turn up before your ordinary visitor, and you're shown around by a guide, and there's just a few of you, so there's not so many people around if you want to get good photographs or whatever. But in my case, when I actually investigated Stonehenge first of all, it was basically just there on the landscape, and anyone could just walk up to it, and if you wanted to, chip bits off it, which is how and why they had to start protecting it, and why now you can only go around with like officials standing around to make sure that nobody goes and does that.
Yeah, well, then that's sort of humans are going to mess it up. Humans are going to mess it up.
But there are literally, I think there's about 1,500 stone circles still surviving in the British Isles, and there were originally like thousands of them. Stonehenge is just the most well known and perhaps the most elaborate because it's got those stones as forming arches in the ring. The other stone circles don't have that, but it's not the largest. About 20 miles to the north of Stonehenge, there's a stone circle called Avebury, and the Avebury stone circle is so huge that it surrounds an entire village, an entire town. It's about a quarter of a mile, maybe towards half a mile in diameter. It's made up of hundreds of stones, some of them weighing up to 40 tons. It dwarfs Stonehenge. It hasn't got what they call the lintel stones, the stones that join them together in arches like Stonehenge has got. So Stonehenge might be the most elaborate, but Avebury, 20 miles to the north, was the biggest, and there were many more bigger than Stonehenge. But everywhere around the country seemed to have them, and probably the people of Stonehenge thought, we're going to create something that's so spectacular no one else will ever be able to recreate it. And they did do for the age. And remember, this was being built about 4,500 years ago. And the people 20 miles up the road of another tribe probably thought, well, okay, we're not going to be able to create something quite so sophisticated, but we're going to make something really big. So it's a kind of, you get local rivalry for these stone circles throughout the country. And just in a little area that's maybe a bit remote, parts of Scotland and so forth in the north of England, you have small stone circles of maybe just 9 or 10 stones that are about 2 feet high, and the stone circle is about 10 feet in diameter. So I don't know, stone circles were really important to what are called the Neolithic culture, the new Stone Age people and the early Bronze Age people of around 4,500 years ago, and nobody knows why. That's actually what my next book's all about, so I can't give away too much because I think I've figured it out, but I'll have to keep that quiet until that one comes out. Now, maybe I'll come back on your show then and reveal it all.
Oh, please do. I'd love that. I was going to ask two things. Now, most of these circles and formations, I've heard different people say, well, they're on intersecting ley lines, and then some people say, well, no, they're not intersecting, but they are considered in points of power and energy locations. Which is true?
Well, the first thing is that I tested out the theory that they actually fall all in straight lines. And the way I did this was to get a map of a certain area, say around Stonehenge, and I marked all the places on it that are from that period when Stonehenge was built. It wasn't just stone circles that they're known as the megalithic people, after the word megalith, which means big stone or large stone. The megalithic people built not only circular stone circles, they also built stone rows. That's like 2 parallel rows of stones. They built artificial hills for some reason which weren't used for burials or anything like that. They created a number of ancient monuments of different kinds. And what people have done over the years is to mark these on maps and then say, okay, if we draw a line between there going through Stonehenge, and we get 7 or 8 things all falling in a direct line, and that must be more than chance. And so that's what they call ley lines. Well, I thought, well, is that true, or would you just get that happening by chance alone? So what I happened to do was just pick something else other than ancient megalithic sites. So I picked some post offices, and I thought, right, how many post offices? And I found as many post offices lined up as there did ancient stone monuments. So it seemed to me, at least, that was just chance, unless somebody, for some reason, laid post offices along some ancient power lines. Now, that's the larger story of ley lines, if you like. I think you'll probably find that they don't fall in straight. All these monuments don't fall in straight lines any more than you'd expect by chance. But in local areas, like, for example, around Stonehenge, you have alignments of stones that aren't there anymore. They've been dragged away centuries ago and used by local people, smashed up to make for building materials over the many centuries that have passed since it was originally built. But there was great stone rows, parallel alignments of stones that went for 2 or 3 miles off in different directions away from Stonehenge. The same happens at Avebury and at other stone circles. And you'll find that in some areas you will get a place where there are you can set off across a field and just walk for a mile and find 7 or 8 single standing stones just on their own, that some of them even in hedgerows that have been overgrown. And that's far more than you expect by chance. So the idea of ley lines crossing the whole country, I don't think is real, in my opinion. But locally, over a few miles, close to stone circles, yes, they did align stones for some reason. Now, what that might have been, I have no idea. So the answer to your question is yes and no.
Well, that's an honest way of answering it. Yeah, I had a theory, and it's about as worth much as anybody's, I guess. I'm thinking a lot of these people were probably living a kind of a hunter-gathering existence, nomadic. Why not, maybe have the conjecture of going, well, they're traveling on animal hunting paths. Maybe these, where they're following the herds, and the way they migrate during different times of the year. Maybe it has something to do with that. I mean, I don't know.
There are certainly very long prehistoric roads in this country that go from one side of the country to the other, that were literally straight pathways that did exist, some of which were later used by the Romans and have even been used today to have modern roads put over them. And you can tell these roads, if roads in Britain are really windy because they're always going around villages and forests and woods and whatever else, unlike the States where you tend to have a lot of area, so they're all straight roads. But when you get a big long straight road in Britain, it's usually because it's an old Roman road, and they were tended to be built on the trackways that the prehistoric people used. And a lot of these trackways were originally built following herds of animals. So you're very right on that point.
Well, I was going to ask you one more thing, and like as I told you before, it's not that I'm trying to be irreverent. It's just things come to my mind, so I ask you about it. When we were talking about Stonehenge, I can't help but bring up the old Spinal Tap movie. I'm not sure if you've ever watched that movie before. There was a movie here in this.
Get to the wrong size.
Okay, yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. And you're telling me about that, and for some reason, I see the little guy dancing around in the jester costume. I'm telling you, that's how my mind works. I don't know why it goes that way, but I was just curious if you kind of took that as sort of an offense, or if you took it in the humor it was meant to be taken in.
Well, I think it's hilarious. It actually did happen. Apparently, the people who wrote Spinal Tap, the actual people who wrote the script, based that on, I can't remember which band it was, but it really happened. Some band did order a Stonehenge. They wanted a few stones, like from Stonehenge, a few standing stones, as part of their stage display. And they asked for them to be 10 feet high, and this got transferred into inches, and somewhere along the line they ended up with this little scale model of Stonehenge. I don't think they ended up with it on stage with dwarfs dancing around it, but I can't remember the Genesis. That was the band that actually really did happen to.
So yeah, Peter Gabriel era Genesis. That makes sense.
Yeah, Peter Gabriel. Yeah. Very early on. So that happened to them apparently, and that's where they got the idea from. But luckily enough, they found when the thing arrived before they went on stage.
I never knew that. I'm happy beyond words just to get that fact of information from you. That's made this interview, which I hope that's not the takeaway from this interview, but that's actually made my day. That's such a crazy story. But that is really strange because people do draw, and because I do want to get into discussing the King Arthur book, that people draw so much from these archetypal things, that have stayed part of our cultures for millennia, and people keep going back to it. People rediscovering metaphysics and things like that, and even guys like, which I mean, you may not be necessarily a fan of, like Aliester Crowley and stuff, but people like Led Zeppelin and things, guys like that, kind of re-brought him back to the forefront in the 60s and early 70s, and it seems like we're forever rediscovering things, metaphysic things and mystical things that are tied in with nature, and I don't know what it is. I think humans are hardwired for that. I think that how do I say this? I'm stumbling because I don't want to sound too hokey, but I think that I don't want to say necessarily we're hardwired to believe or have a faith, but I definitely think that we look beyond ourselves, and if you are very close with nature, you're probably more open to that. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying everybody believes that there's fairies and brownies and whatever helping cobblers out with shoes, but I do think that I challenge anyone to go stand out in woods. I'm not talking just right off the highway or something like that, like a good ancient deep wood, and turn off your phones and just listen to the sounds of nature, and tell me that you don't feel some connection to it, that you don't feel a power there. And at least, and maybe it's because I'm from Western Kentucky. We've got a lot of woods here. We have a lot of lakes, a lot of scenic natural beauty in this area, and I don't know what it is. Maybe that's why these type of stories and this type of research has always drawn me. Is that something that you seem to have had even before you were doing things in journalism and all that? Were you always that type of young guy that would kind of was like looking for those different stories and going out to those old areas and ancient areas that most people either had forgotten or maybe didn't even know about?
Well, I remember once you mentioned Led Zeppelin getting into all this sort of Aliester Crowley stuff. Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin collected anything to do with Aliester Crowley, Crowleyana as they called it, anything he'd owned, and he actually bought a house that Crowley had owned on the banks of Loch Ness in Scotland, and he hardly ever went up there. And when we were working for the magazine years ago, Strange Phenomena it was called, it went out of business years ago, but that was the name of it. We went up, myself and a couple of others from the magazine, to have a look at this house that Crowley had owned, and Crowley had owned it in the early 1900s, and this is going back to when we went up there in the 1980s. And there was a guy who was looking after the place, who lived there looking after it for the Led Zeppelin guy, and he was quite friendly. He said, "Oh, you can come in and look around." And we said to him, Crowley came here. He bought this house especially, apparently, for him to perform certain rituals in. He bought it basically as a big seance house and a place to raise spirits, and he was actually trying to do what's called the Abramelin ritual, which was some sort of ancient thing to get in touch with his own guardian angel or something. But whatever he did, he got up to all sorts of mischief in the place. And we were saying to this guy who was looking after it for Jimmy Page, we said, well, come on, isn't it scary staying here? He said, oh yeah, weird things happen. Lights go on and off, furniture moves, you put something down, you turn around, you go back, it's moved. And he said, to be quite honest, after a few months of it, you just get so used to it, you don't take much notice. It's just like if you'd never seen a TV set before, you'd be pretty scared to see one go on. And he said that after a while, you just get used to the whole thing. So I thought, well, fair enough, I suppose. There he is living in what might be the most haunted house in Britain, and he doesn't even think about it. And But what he did tell me, which was really weird about this Boleskine house on the banks of Loch Ness, was that Crowley went up there and did whatever summoning of the spirits that he did in 1906, and it was right after that the first modern Loch Ness monster sightings were seen, and they were seen right opposite Boleskine House in the lake, in the loch, out where Crowley had done all this stuff. And I said, well, are you trying to say to me there was some connection between Aliester Crowley and raising the monster from the loch? He said, well, have a look at this. And he opened a cupboard, and in there was some sort of, it was like a sheet, that like a cloth sheet, that Crowley had painted with a picture of the spirit he was trying to raise. And it looked just like the images of the Loch Ness monster that people have claimed to have seen. Yet he'd done this before any of the modern sightings. So
he could have very easily been almost connecting with like a Cthulhu type Lovecraftian.
Yeah,
wow.
Going into the world of Lovecraft here. Yeah, a Cthulhu type creature that he created in the loch. There were earlier sightings, but earlier, going right the way back to the time of, to the Dark Ages, some priest had claimed to have seen what the Scots call a water kelpie, which is a water horse in the loch.
Yeah.
Yet many lochs in Scotland have got legends about spirits in the loch that they call kelpie water horses.
They're almost like white looking, aren't they?
I beg pardon?
Aren't they sort of almost a milky looking color?
They are. That's right. Absolutely. That's what. Yeah, they're like white horses. So that's not the same as a Loch Ness monster with flippers and a big long bend over neck, which people claim to see today. And they have only been seen looking like that since Crowley did his thing in 1906, I think it was. So, I mean, I'm not saying he did raise this spirit in the loch, but I thought that was an interesting story. I've always wanted to try and get that into a book somewhere.
Well, in the places that you've been, since we are touching slightly on the paranormal and things, because one of the elements of the show, I will discuss with people like, well, what was one of the first things that scared you? But considering that you have been to so many places, have you yourself had sort of weird paranormal encounters and strange issues with equipment and thinking you're seeing or hearing different things, and that either that you could explain as something non-paranormal, or maybe there was something that's like, well, it kind of left me wondering?
Well, the very first book I ever wrote was called The Green Stone, and that was a paranormal story more than a paranormal and historical quest. The bottom line of it was that in around 1600 there had been this ring that had belonged to Mary Queen of Scots that was said to have been cursed, and it had been hidden, and clues to where this had been hidden were left in these paintings on the wall of this old Elizabethan manor house. Now, that was the legend. Cutting a long story short, myself and others from the magazine tried to decipher these paintings on the wall to see if we could find if it really did lead somewhere. And cutting a very long story short, one of the images there showed a youthful King Arthur wielding the sword Excalibur with all his knights behind him gathered on a hill. Now, this is a painting that had been put there in about 1605. And so you've got the picture of Arthur with his knights on a hill behind him. Right near this old Elizabethan house, there was a place on the map we found called Knight's Hill. There's knights on a hill behind Arthur. And at the bottom of this hill, there's an old bridge that had been there in in Elizabethan times, called Arthur's Bridge. So we thought, wow, that's got to be where this thing is. We went there because the figure of Arthur was looking down and to the left. We thought, okay, the left-hand side of the foundation stones of the bridge overlooking the lake, where a little stream fed the lake, that could be where something's hidden. The number 9 was very prominent in these pictures. There was 9 knights, for example. So eventually we worked out 9 stones along, 9 down. We had the stone removed, and behind it we found this short sword or long dagger that had been heavily encrusted with years of sediment We took it to a museum. The museum cleaned it up. They said it had been there since the early 1600s, and it had on it the coat of arms of Mary Queen of Scots. And I won't go into the whole story, but along its blade there was an inscription that led us to where this green stone was hidden in a brass casket buried on the banks of a nearby river. Now, that in its own right is a historical clue-solving quest. But remember, this ring that Mary Queen of Scots had got this green stone in it. The ring wasn't in the box, but just the green stone she was supposed to have that was supposed to be cursed. Well, we didn't believe any of this, but we thought, well, we've got a good story here, having found this sword and this stone after following these clues that have been there for hundreds of years. Suddenly, strange things started to happen at the offices of the magazine, and the office was basically the bottom floor, the ground floor, first floor, as you would say in America, of an old Victorian building, and underneath there was a cellar. And what started to happen once we put the sword and stone in the offices is that, firstly, people started saying, well, there's a strange smell everywhere, and no one could figure out where it was coming from, and it would just come and go. Then smoke started to fill the whole place, and we thought the wiring must be out, there must be a fire, but check everywhere, no explanation for it. Then the smoke would go. It would keep coming back again. Then things would start moving around. One time I was walking down the corridor, and a great big box of magazines, weighing a heck of a lot, and pull you back out if you try and pick it up on your own, went flying past my head and crashed into the door at the other end of the corridor. Other people came round and saw items moving around, like a book would jump off the bookshelves and so on. In the end, there was a TV film crew from the local television station came with journalists and actually filmed this smoke appearing. They filmed lampshades and stuff, moving around on their own. I mean, it was really weird that things had happened while that stone and that sword were in the house. The moment we took them out, it all stopped. Whenever the stone went, it didn't happen, but only when the stone was brought back to the offices of the magazine. And eventually, all the wiring in the house went, and it wasn't that was causing the smoke, but the wire, it's as if it was overloading the electricity. Lights kept blowing, and in the end, the electric company said, you can't have any more lights on in there. You can't have the electricity connected any longer. It's too dangerous. Now, everybody, at that time, I didn't have another place to live. I was actually living in the building. Everybody else who was also coming there said, we're not coming back to that place at all. So I was left to sleep in that place on my own with all this weird stuff going on, with no lighting in the middle of winter.
Wow.
So after that, I kind of lost my fear of the paranormal too.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you were pretty much... it was one of those baptisms by fire, as we call around here. It almost had sort of an Enfield poltergeist quality to it, with all the movement.
It's funny you should say that. I mean, this was actually this happened a year or two before the Enfield case. It actually happened in 1979. I might be wrong. Enfield case might have been 80. I don't know. It's around about the same time. And literally in the last few days, I've been approached by a TV company about making a 3-part mini-series.
Do it.
Based on the book, because of the success of the Enfield Poltergeist the mini-series and the Conjuring 2. And they said, this is so much like that kind of thing. But so I've said, well, if you can get it made, let me know. So
yes, please do.
You should say that.
I don't. Maybe, you know what? I would say that's a coincidence, but I've learned that I think everything connects for a reason. I don't know, because that just came to my mind. I was like, that has elements of that, and like I said, but it's a lot more intense. I was going to ask you too, real quick, because like I said, we were going to talk about your new book, and so I don't want to get too far away from that. Can you touch base a little bit on how that come about, and was that something that you were wanting to write for a while, or is that some stuff that come to light that you discovered that you wanted to turn around to release now, or how did that happen?
Well, the King Arthur book, I mean, I've been working on the King Arthur mystery for about 20 years, really, and I had other books about King Arthur come out earlier, so it was accumulation of things that had happened over 20 years, I suppose. The bottom line is that the King Arthur story that we all know and love, of him fighting dragons, rescuing damsels in distress, and all the rest of it, is basically medieval fiction written in around about the year 1200, between about the year 11 and 1200 AD. But what's interesting is that the stories are set, we're told, in the books that were written in the medieval period, the story is set around the year 500, when the Roman Empire has just collapsed. Britain is in a state of anarchy. It's being invaded by the Anglo-Saxons who are coming from Germany, and Arthur is the last king, the last great warrior in Britain to make a stand against these invading Anglo-Saxons. Now, the way that they're portrayed in these stories is like knights in shining armour fighting with big broadswords and living in Gothic castles. Well, back in the year 500, life was very different to that. It was called the Dark Ages for good reason, that society had collapsed, the Roman Empire had fallen, people were pretty much living in mud huts for the most part. But fortifications would have been wooden stockades, armour would have been Roman-style armour. The warriors would tend to look more like Vikings than they would look like a medieval knight. But during the Middle Ages, when these stories were written, people had they didn't have historians, and they didn't have archaeologists, and nobody really knew what people at that time had looked like. So they tended to set the story in their own time frame. If you ever go and have a look at a painting made in the Middle Ages of the crucifixion, for example, you will see the soldiers around the cross dressed as soldiers in armour from the medieval European period. They're not dressed as Roman soldiers at all, because in that time they read the Bible, they could hear there were soldiers at the foot of the cross, but they had no idea what they'd dress like. So this is why the King Arthur of medieval legend is portrayed as this knight in shining armour and living in a huge Gothic castle, whereas in reality, if he really had lived around 500 AD, he would have been very different. Now, the question is, was there a real figure, or was he just made up? Well, a couple of hundred years, well, actually about 400 years before the medieval romances, as they're called, were written about Arthur, there are historical records that still survive at Oxford University and at the British Library in London that tell us that there was a historical figure called Arthur who fought against the Anglo-Saxons at exactly the time that the medieval stories tell us King Arthur was doing just that. So it does seem that there really was an historical King Arthur, and it was him I was intending to find and pin him down. Where was he born? Where did he die? Where was he buried?
Right. Well, I mean, and that's the thing that when you talk to people, and I think you have a similar sort of drive, there is the public face of things and what popular opinion is, and then, like you said, you get behind. It's like if I spoke with anybody, say somebody famous, say Michael Caine, okay, great actor, and great talent, but I would want to learn. I would want to know something about the man. I would want to know that person. If you, it's more than. Otherwise, you're doing them kind of a disservice, and you're not really treating them as a fellow human being. You have to kind of accept different, warts and all, as the old expression goes, of the character. Those, like you said, there is a romanticized version of everything, and that's generally the one that is most drawn to because it's the most attractive to people. Because most people don't want to look at the grit and the brutality and some of the hard choices that people had to make, especially in those dark times. Because, I've talked to people before about Vlad Tepes, in his time, he was considered a hero. I mean, even today there's statues of the man, because he defended his land from invaders. But by what would be considered our modern standards, he was a barbarian. He was a monster, because of some of the ways that he handled these invaders, and which I would like very much to hear more about this more human, sort of, to coin the phrase, sort of the Gnostic author. The less imperfect, godly king, and the real man behind it.
Well, the way I actually found who he was by process of elimination, really. All the medieval tales said he lived in a big city, that in fact the most sophisticated and well-defended city in Britain, around 500 AD. Now, it's called Camelot these days. Well, that came about in around about the year 1190, when a French writer by the name of Chrétien de Troyes wrote a poem about Arthur, and he decided he needed a word to rhyme with Lancelot, and he invented the name Camelot. Before that time, Camelot is not referred to by name. It's only Arthur had this marvellous city. It seems that by about the year 1200, people had forgotten the name of the capital of Britain in Arthur's time, which, remember, is 700 years earlier. I mean, you're talking ages before, and they didn't have the kind of historical records you have today. So, okay, let's just say that we have got a man who rules from the most sophisticated city in the country at 500 AD. What do we know from archaeology? Does that tell us what the most powerful city, the capital of Britain at that time, was? It does. Although London had been the capital of Britain during Roman times, when the Romans left, the Anglo-Saxons had invaded from Germany and conquered most of the east of Britain, which included London, leaving a central city, which was called Viraconium, as being the new capital of Britain. Now, recently, this city has been excavated. It's unlike London, which is now a modern metropolis, and the foundations of Roman London are underneath modern office blocks and pavings and shops. In Viraconium, the remains of that Roman city are in the middle of open countryside, so archaeologists could do a lot of work there, and they were able to find out that when a lot of other Roman cities were abandoned once the Roman Empire had collapsed in the 400s, this city of Viraconium remained not only prosperous, but they were able to completely rebuild and redefend the walls. And at the centre of this city, they discovered that there had been a palace of some extremely important leader, presumably some local warlord. Now, nothing else like that has been found from that period anywhere else in the country. So if you wanted to go from the archaeological point of view, if there was an Arthur and he did rule from the most important city in Britain in 500 AD, then that would have to be Viraconium. So I then went to Oxford University and looked in the Bodleian Library, where they have records of the various kings and queens of Britain, and found that around that time the person who ruled from Viraconium was a British warlord by the name of Owen Llan Gwyn. Now, firstly, I thought that it's not Arthur after all. But that's interesting. Perhaps Owen Llan Gwyn was the man upon whom the legend of Arthur was based, because he must have been the most important warlord in Britain to be living in the most important city. But then I found that a writer by the name of Gildas, who was a monk who wrote within living memory of that period, and his work still survives in the British Library in London. In this monk Gildas refers to this king Owen Llan Gwyn, but he refers to him, and he's writing in Latin, by his battle name. Now, a lot of kings and war leaders of the time would be given the name of an animal, sometimes a real animal, sometimes a mythological creature, to somehow represent their prowess. If they were sly, they would be the fox, or they could be called the wolf, or this particular king he refers to as Ursus in Latin, which means the bear. And in Brythonic, which is the language spoken in Britain at that time and still preserved in modern Welsh, the word for a bear is Arth. And in Brythonic, Arthur means the bear. So the man who ruled from the most powerful city in Britain at the time, that Arthur is said to have done just that, was actually called Arthur the Bear. So I pretty much found the guy and proved that he really existed for the first time.
Wow. And that again, that's got to flip so much of the history or mythology, or what do you want to call it, on its ear, because like you said, it takes it back to such an early time, totally changed. Like I said, I had no clue about the Camelot name being fictionalized. So much of this, like you said, is so kind of 180 from what people had in their minds before. Had you had any sort of people going, well, kind of want to argue it or this and that, or because everyone has a naysayer. You can't hardly write anything without somebody questioning it.
Oh yes, I mean many people said, "Oh no, Arthur." Yeah, no, but because he was called a bear, that wasn't his real name, was it? I said, no, that's why he's gone unnoticed for all the years. But then I found out something else. I found that his father also had a battle name of an animal. In this case, a mythological animal. He was called the dragon, or he was named the Terrible Head Dragon. And in Brythonic and modern Welsh, the Terrible Head Dragon is translated as Uther Pendragon, and that is the name of Arthur's father in the medieval romances. So you've got a guy called Arthur, or at least that's his title, whose father is called Uther Pendragon, ruling from the most sophisticated city in the country at exactly the same time that Arthur did. Well, if that isn't Arthur, then I don't know.
Yeah,
who else could he be?
So that's a lot of smoke for no fire to be there, That's
but still, people will say, "Oh no, we're not having that," and people get really defensive. I mean, in Britain, you've got people who say, "No, Arthur came from Cornwall in Tintagel Castle, which is where legend said he was born." Others say, "No, he came from Glastonbury, which is in the west of the country." Others say he came from Scotland. Others say he came from Wales, and some of them get really quite annoyed when people say, "Oh, have you read Graham Phillips' book about King Arthur?" And I say, "Oh no, I'm not having that. It's almost blasphemous to say that King Arthur came from some place other than where they think he came from." But well, over the years, I mean, most of my books have been quite controversial, so I've kind of got used to that as well as ghosts.
Man, well, Graham, let me ask you this, because like I said, we've got a couple minutes before this hour's up. It really went quick. I want to get you back on here so we can discuss more stuff. I want to ask you real quick, do you want to give your website and some other quick information before the show's up?
Yeah, my website is grahamphillips.net. If you just search Google for Graham Phillips author, you will find me and my website, and on there you will find the link to my Facebook and everything else, and on the first page of my website there's all the books there that I've written, or most of them. You just click on one of those and there's all the information about every one of the books. In fact, to be quite honest, you don't even need to buy most of the books, because I put most of the information on my website. grahamphillips.net.
Well, I'm sure people want to buy your books, and that's the thing, is that people have seen so much of this different media, may not even realize that the root, the creator of it, and which is you. Graham, I want to thank you for being on. I'm going to start up my outro music, and I want to tell everybody thank you. And if you don't mind sticking around, I'll talk to you a second off air. Everybody, thank you guys for coming. And man, I've learned so much in this. It's almost not enough time in an hour to do so. I definitely have to have Mr. Phillips back on. But as the day is getting short and the shadows are growing long, I want you guys to get out there, have a good time, and explore, and just take in the best of the last days of summer, because fall is coming, and the dead of winter awaits. But above all, love yourselves, love each other, love one another, love everybody. That's how about we do that? But don't be afraid to stay scared. Thank you for coming to my house, and until next time, take care and God bless.